Welcome to this video series of the Python course. In the previous videos, the topics that we have covered include basic syntax in Python, introduction to different data types, and conditional statements in Python. In today's video, we will discuss about different types of loops in Python, starting with the definition of loops. Loops are used in programming to repeat a part of code multiple times. In Python, there are mainly two types of loops: for loop and while loop. Advantages of using loops in a program. Instead of writing the same code for each task, you write it once inside a loop, and the computer takes care of repeating it for you, which saves time and effort. Loops also help in situations where you don't know exactly how many times you need to do something. You can keep looping until a condition is met. Starting with for loops. These loops are used when the number of iterations are low. Iterations in programming are the repeated execution of a set of instructions. So this is the syntax for loops. Here, item means variable name that represents the current item in iteration, and iterable is the collection of items to iterate over, such as lists, tuples, strings, etc. We will study about lists and tuples and strings in our upcoming videos. Now let us see an example of for loop. Here is an example of for loop in which the range function generates a sequence of numbers starting from 1 up to 5. It will not include the number 6, and so the loop will iterate over numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. During each iteration, the current number num is printed using the print function. So this is a loop that is trying to print numbers from 1 to 5. Now we will see what are while loops. These loops are used when the number of iterations are not known in advance. They continue executing until a specific condition is no longer met. This is the syntax for while loop, where we will write a condition in front of the keyword while, and then this will be the code that will be executed if that condition is true. Here is an example of while loop. In this example, we initialize a variable I to 0. The while loop executes as long as I is less than 5. Inside the loop, we print the current value of I and increment it by 1. Therefore, the loop prints the numbers from 0 to 4. So finally, coming to nested loops. Nested loops refer to a situation where one loop is placed inside another loop. Each time the outer loop iterates, the inner loop will complete its full iteration. Here is an example of nested loop. In this example, the outer loop iterates over the range 0 to 2 represented by variable I. Within each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop iterates over the range 0 to 1 represented by variable j. During each iteration of the inner loop, the values of I and j are printed. This results in the output of all possible combinations of I and j within their respective ranges. So, in the beginning, the value of I, when the outer loop will get iterated, the value of I for the first iteration will be 0. And when the inner loop will get iterated, with the value of j during the first iteration will be 0. And for the second iteration, the value of j will become 1. So similarly, all the possible combinations of I and j will be printed on screen. So now we will go to the Google Colab platform, where we will see some practical application of what we have learned today. Now we are at the Google Colab platform, and let's start with an example on for loop. So in this example, the range function will generate a sequence of numbers from 1 to 6. Remember that number 6 will not be included, and so for each iteration, the variable num will store values from 1 to 5. So if we will execute this code, we can see that a sequence of numbers from 1 to 5 is printed on screen. If we change the value of 6 and replace it by, say, number 8, and now we will execute it, we can see that a sequence of numbers from 1 to 7 is printed on screen. Now let us check an example on while loop. In this example, the loop body will be executed till this condition is true, which is till value of I is less than 5. And so for each iteration, this statement will increment the value of I by 1. So let's execute this code. We can see that the sequence of numbers from 0 to 4 is printed on screen. As soon as the value of I becomes equal to 5, the condition becomes false, and so So the loop body is not executed. But at last, let us check an example of nested loop. In this example, all possible combinations of values 0 to 2 and 0 to 1 will be printed on screen. If we execute this code, we can see that all the possible combinations are printed. This is because value of I will iterate over range 0 to 2 and value of j will iterate over range 0 to 1. And so during the iteration, all the possible combinations will be printed. So this marks the end of this video, and that was all about different types of loops in Python.